Member Berger? Hang on, he's here. I need to just let him in. Member McCutcheon?
Here.
Member Patton?
Here.
Member Rambo? Member McCune? Member Donaldson?
Here.
Member Garitano? Co-chair Remy?
Present here.
Co-chair Archeski?
Here. You'll probably just do it with the faces as long as they live is up there, not somebody's picture, but may save some time. I don't really have any opening remarks. I don't know if co-chair Remy has anything.
No, not really. I just would say that obviously a lot of work has been done in the last couple weeks in this committee, and we're most appreciative of the work of Ms. Arnett and Mr. Vunich, Rick Archeski, and Dr. Hammer, and John Jones and his group this past month. I think did a lot of work actually, and obviously tonight we're going to dig into that. And then for a number of the new members that have joined just over the past couple months, I'm hoping that we could have, and I can make some slides for January just to take you through at least the duration of where we started and where we currently are, and hopefully where we're going. That way everybody starts from that same frame of reference, and that's what I think we're most hopeful for. But you know, obviously you saw from the previous email that we're prioritizing at least our focus right now for this task force on some of the areas to get things up and moving with our certainly Dr. Hammer and our consultants in that direction right now. So I'm most appreciative of everyone being so patient and looking forward to where this goes in 2021.
Okay, thank you. Any comments on the minutes? I need approval of the minutes. Motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Motion approved by John Gunther, second by Teresa Clark. Any changes, comments? Voice vote, please. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I had a comment.
Aye.
Sorry, Mr. Archeski. I had a comment.
Yes, ma'am.
On under subcommittees it says that the public education includes stormwater master plan. I was under the impression we were saying that stormwater master plan was going to be under the other subcommittee, the ordinance review.
Committee.
Yeah. Maybe I misunderstood, but that's what I thought.
That's right.
No, and I can amend the minutes, but the agenda from last time, we had it incorrectly, I guess, but that was how the agenda was posted, to have it under there. But if it causes confusion, I can just simply remove it.
I think you had it correct, and Councilmember Clark, you have it correct as well. I think what happened is after that meeting, we recognized that ordinances and the stormwater master plan had a better fit than having it with education. And that we had previously talked about that, and I apologize. I probably brought some of that confusion last meeting. So you're absolutely right. We've moved to two subcommittees, and that's education separate from that combined subcommittee. Does that sound right, Ms. Arnett?
Yes. But I can adjust it so there's no confusion when it's
Okay.
posted.
Anyone else? Well, motion to approve the minutes passes. Do we have any public comment?
We had none submitted in advance, but there is one attendee. So if, Bill S., if you would like to speak, if you can use the raise hand feature, and we'll promote you in to speak at public comment. I'm not seeing anything.
So if not, okay, let's move on to standards used for prioritization of those areas identified as most critical. I think we got into this pretty much with Dr. Hammer's report initially. What kind of discussions do you want to have on this at this point in time? I know the council's been asking about prioritization, but I thought Dr. Hammer's, and maybe we can smooth this out a little bit, but Dr. Hammer's report kind of went through how everything was prioritized based on infrastructure and things of that sort. But maybe we can even make it more clear. I don't know.
Mr. Hammer, would you and Mr. Vunich, would you guys just mind just taking us through just sort of a quick Cliff Notes version of how you arrived at these prioritized locations specifically as they address public and infrastructure? And then Mr. Vunich, Justin, from our council meeting, if you wouldn't mind just seeing if there's a couple comments that could be made with how these may in fact, do we have any ideas of how these prioritized locations may in fact influence some of the private areas that certainly have been brought to the attention and that we're making a list for MSD, if that's possible?
Well, I'll defer to Dr. Hammer in a second, but Mr. Archesky is correct. There has been a interest of late in how the prioritization of the locations was developed, not so much again from the task force itself, although we do have several new members that would probably benefit from hearing it, if not for the first time, at least a second time. And that interest has led to the decision on the part of the co-chairs and staff to put a formal memorandum together that kind of combines everything that went into the process into a single location. I want to emphasize that this was just not staff generated. As you know, Dr. Hammer has been with the task force since its beginning back in 2019. More recently, John Jones from Wright Water Engineers out of Colorado and Joe Wilson, a scientist out of Rolla, Missouri, have now also been participating. But equally important is the fact that we did garner a number of citizen input items. And those came when we were soliciting them from their perspective, their backyards, down the street, in the common ground areas. And so what we discovered was a trend in those citizen comments. The vast majority of them came out of Cox Creek. And so Cox Creek seemed the natural location to look at the prioritizations first, because we had the greatest number, but also due to our science team, we also knew that we had some of the greatest risk. And I'll conclude with that and let Dr. Hammer take it from there.
Dr. Hammer?
Does anybody have any specific questions before I run through a quick overview? Okay. How would you like me to best do this? Just go right through this list of critical locations as Joe wrote them up for the meeting? I think that'd be the most effective way to do it. And before I do that, I would refer you to page 2, where Joe listed 13, or number 13, he listed some criteria. Didn't think about this when I reviewed Joe's draft a couple days ago, but there's one I would add to it because it definitely affects the first priority. Right after F, threats to buildings and structures, first publicly owned and in certain instances privately held types. I think we should add one, and that would be a specific stream condition that threatens other reaches of the stream. And that is why the triple meander is at the top of the list. That section of stream is unraveling so rapidly, and it provides, I think, probably considerable breaking, if you want to put that word in quotes, of the momentum of the Cox Creek as it comes down out of the uplands, the headwater areas up by Manchester Road. And if we lose that triple meander, all three of the consultants are pretty uncertain of what the exact consequences would be, but it would probably be disastrous, particularly to a number of the bridges that have already been constructed. So this is the number one priority, simply because letting that thing go would greatly shorten the slope between Elegant Child and the third part of the meander. And So there would be an increase in velocity, and there would be a long straight stretch before the Cox Creek starts to meander again meaningfully, and that would be down near Quathium Farms, and we've got 2 or 3 sensitive areas just downstream from that too. So that's why we put the triple meander at the top of the list, and it's been there since the beginning. A couple other things have shifted, which may have prompted some of the questions. What are these guys doing? And I would go back to almost every presentation I've made in which I've said this system is extremely dynamic. And I think the fact that we've changed a few of the priority locations since May, when I submitted the report that Joe attached to this, very nicely done summary of his, is testimony to how much the stream does change and what an impact the last couple of years of extreme event precipitation occurrences have had upon the stream. So we did make one change that probably has 1 or 2 people questioning what we did. We took the highlands of Wild Horse off of the top 5 priorities, primarily because of the amount of room we've got, the volume of material between that meander that I had on the list at the beginning and where Strecker Road is. I walked that the last time I was in the field, and right now it's about 125 feet. The other thing that caused us to make a shift was the detention basin facility and some of the things we looked at the Meadows of Wild Horse, and that specific cut bank that parallels Strecker Road just before we get to the bridge that crosses Strecker Road between the entrances of Wildwood Meadows and Quathium Farms has started to unravel very quickly. And there were a couple things that we saw the last time we went to the field when John Jones and Joe Wilson were here, and Dan was in the field with us at the time, so he can verify this as well. That gully that was eroding from the culvert under Strecker Road towards Caw Creek the nick point has moved back 5 or 6 feet since the first time I saw it, and it is now entrenched all the way to the thalweg of the stream channel for about 8 feet back. So it's moved considerably, and as it began to downcut and move back towards Strecker Road, it's exposed a sewer line. I don't know how many of you are aware that there's a sewer line that pretty much parallels Cox Creek all the way from Point Clayton down to Quathium Farms. Some of the sewer line is now exposed, and the fill around it that was put in when the pipe was put in place is now exposed as well. And that fill is one of the main things holding that gully in place right now, because the fill is compacted and it's clayey and cherty, so it's a lot tougher than the reworked lush silt material that overlies the stream gravel bars that run back and forth across the valley there. So we moved that to a priority simply because we're not sure how long we've got. The first time I paced that off from the nick point in the gully to Strecker Road, it was about 55 feet, and it's right at 40 now. So we've lost 15 feet in 7 months. And I'm afraid that once that nick point moves past the sewer line, which is then going to become problematic itself, then it's going to move pretty quickly towards Strecker Road. Rick was with us in the field when we had the other 2 consultants here as well. So we walked up Strecker Road, and one of the problems is that road on the west side of Strecker Road, the culvert is catching everything from the top of the hill up at the south end of where the highlands, where Wildwood Meadows is. So it's a lot of water is being channeled under that culvert. And one of the things that might be considered would be a way to put another culvert into the system to kind of lighten the load at this one weak point. If I were to go down that road and pick one place to put a culvert that would cause the most damage, that would be it, because they've aimed it right at an active cut bank that's got some other problems too. And then the other contributing factor is it had to be Mmsd that did this, just to back the truck up when that gully erosion started and drop a load of coarse fragments in there, and that's helping destabilize the bank. The curve of the bank there on that meander used to be really smooth, and just in the last 4 months, it's developed 4 or 5 locations that are starting to unravel more quickly than the rest. And usually when that happens, it means things are going to move pretty rapidly. So that's why Wildwood Meadows is now the second one on the list. Or the third one, I mean. The detention basin at Elegant Child is second, and I skipped it because you've all seen that and we've talked about it before. But when we were in the field 2 weeks ago with the other consultants, Dan and Rick, it was apparent that the detention basin at this location had finally been breached. There's also, to the south of where the detention basin is breached, there's a line of trees that was probably planted when the Elegant Child was put in place. We're about to lose 2 or 3 of those. We've lost another section of the stormwater drain pipe that comes out at the cut bank there. And there's now a gully moving its way back towards the Elegant Child retaining wall behind the facility that was not there and not nearly as deeply exposed even 3 months ago as it is now. It wasn't there when I began this work back in February. So that location is starting to unravel pretty quickly too. That's why it's number 2 on the list. And really it's part of the triple meander, but we decided if we were going to prioritize the triple meander, this is where we should start working, at the Elegant Child. The other thing we observed in the field that I haven't had a chance to report other than that brief mention when I did the presentation on soils for the training session on November 12th, the stream Cox Creek evidently breached that peninsula, which is the first of the meanders, just downstream from the Elegant Child. There's a place, I've got a few pictures of it that I took on the 12th, that the water actually passed over that peninsula and left debris in the woods. And I think that was because there was a large number of trees. There were about a dozen trees down in the creek right along there. And I think one of those heavy flows we had in late August, early September was such that that debris created enough of a dam that some of the water actually diverted and went right across that peninsula. So we've got a situation now where if we get another event or two like that, that section of the creek is ready to cut off. One more big event could do it. And so we need to really be serious about addressing that issue. We also added one more, the community park at Bonham Creek. I hadn't walked that part of the creek before. We decided we should do that after having gone into the town center extended area and seen what was going on in some of those locations. So we wanted to walk some of the headwaters downstream on Bonham Creek. And when we got into the creek there at Community Park and started walking to the south back up towards Manchester Road, we noticed that there's 3 or 4 extremely large trees that have been undercut to the point that they're starting to lean a little bit. And if those go down and take the bank with them, that park is not going to last very long. So that was a very great disappointment to find that we've got some unraveling that's that serious in the upper portions of Bonham Creek. And when I juxtapose that with what Mr. Vunich and I saw in Fox Creek, there's some reaches down there too, which Rob had already reported to us as being of concern. When Mr. Vunich and I walked that back in June, we didn't see anything that was really threatening any infrastructure at the time, but we're going to put that on a list of places to watch too. So that's another addition that's not in this report that I think we need to consider. Anybody have any questions so far?
No, just a comment. I know with the Wildwood Meadows, we talked about diverting some of that water possibly into the detention pond at Wildwood Meadows. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. There was some concern raised by both John Jones and Joe Wilson about how that detention basin was set up. It's huge, and it doesn't seem to be structured in such a way that it can catch as much runoff as it could, and that's why Rick made that comment. That was one of the discussions we had. How can we get more water into this detention basin? That pretty much covered all, Rick?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'm glad you reminded me of that. there's I haven't seen any of these locations, but one of the things Kathy and Joe reported was when they went through all the comments that came in from the citizens. Kathy mentioned earlier tonight, quite a few or most of those are on Cox Creek. These are backyard locations I have not yet seen, but I will as soon as I can. And the weather's getting really good for that now because there's no critters and I can actually see the landscape. So we'll be taking a look at these locations that have been reported by the citizens and determine which of those, if any, require some immediate action. The temporary mitigation locations, I'm at the top of the next page now. This is what we were discussing primarily in the field when John Jones and Joe Wilson were here. They have absolutely no qualms or reservations with the idea of moving some of this huge accumulation of cherty bedload around in the channel to buy us some time. But they're more quantitative in this than I am, and their concerns were, what should the channel morphology look like? What should the cross section of a created channel be shaped like? How wide should it be? And what should we do, particularly to the base, to try to hold it in place long enough for us to do the rest of the estimating for costs of other repairs, more permanent repairs, and deal with other issues that may come up while we're doing this. So they're going to be running some models to determine what flow velocities are likely given the rainfall events that they have now to work with. And one of the things that we discussed quite a bit out in the field that we didn't really get around to, Joe, this would be a good time to bring it up, is somebody checking out the quality of the LiDAR coverage we have in Wildwood so that we can use that LiDAR to create slope steepnesses along those reaches of Cox Creek. And so we can also use it to do some modeling within the channel itself. If we start out with a LiDAR model of what's already there, it's much easier for the engineers then to play three-dimensional games, moving that debris around that bed load and reconstructing the channel. So that's something we'll have to talk about in more detail soon. The retrofitting of the existing detention basins, long overdue. So this will be something that we'll begin as soon as we can. It's something that should be ongoing while the engineers are assessing how to configure this triple meander reach so that we can buy some time for the other work that we're doing. Are there any questions on that? Because I think that's one that that's low-hanging fruit. And as we've said before, once we start working in the detention basins, we'll have somebody in almost every subdivision in the town at one point or another. So that'll raise some public awareness and give us an opportunity to do some educational outreach. So that's one of the main reasons that's on here right now. Even though we don't have a lot of money to begin doing any retrofitting, we can at least determine which basins would respond favorably to holding water if they're retrofitted and cleaned up, and which ones we might be wasting our time with, and where we might put some other locations as well if necessary to hold back some other water. And then finally, do some calculations on the total effect of this over time in the headwaters of Cox Creek.
Yeah, I guess the question I would have is where do you start? You start in the headwaters with the detention, retention areas, or would you start where possibly you already have some problems, correct those first, and then go back up to the headwaters?
I think that's something the committee should discuss. My gut reaction would be that you answered your question, your first question with the second. I think we should start in the headwaters.
Okay.
Particularly above the triple meander.
Does that also fall under that LiDAR review as well to understand the capacities of these various detention basins?
Having the LiDAR information, if it's precise enough, would allow us to do some really high quality modeling of total volume possible for stormwater retention. That's a good question, John. And then the last thing. I had a meeting
last night with my chloride group that collects chloride samples during the winter in the St. Louis County. They actually have ArcView now that they got information from MSD. They're called sub-watersheds. And they got them, they're already out there. If we could maybe get that from MSD, we could load it into our system.
That's a good idea. That'd be a big help in their modeling. And then finally, when we were at the Wildwood Meadows, looking at that gully that I've talked about, we went down and looked at the at Cox Creek downstream from where that gully has entrenched into the main channel to see what the effects were. And we saw a few things with that bridge that were a little bit concerning, one of which is, and it's been repeated, you may recall that back in May, I submitted a summary of some of the things I was seeing with the bridges that were troubling in terms of the potential that was there for erosion in the channel itself. One of them occurs right there at the bridge on Strecker Road between Quathium Farms and Wildwood Meadows, and that is that the post-bank riprapping and contouring was done in such a way that it actually pinches out into the creek, both upstream and downstream from the bridge, and creates problems with water flow under the bridge. It actually acts as a little bit of a dam, and that further exacerbates the erosion that we're already starting to see there in two places upstream from the bridge. But in that riprap that was put there, we're losing the riprap because it was placed over plastic, not geotechnical fabric, and not placed in such a way that vegetation could grow in it. So it not only didn't do the job it was supposed to, it's causing additional problems. So one of the recommendations that both John and Joe Wilson had was to go back out and look at all these bridges, and low-hanging fruit would be going in right now before we have more serious problems and recontouring the fill and the riprap around these bridges so that they're not causing turbulent flow downstream. That pretty much summarizes what we came up with in that very busy day and a half, 2 days that they were here. We were in the field on the 12th from 7 o'clock or 7:30 until after dark. And we talked about it for quite a bit afterwards. So it was a real productive day. I'm real happy those two are on board because they both got so much experience. Joe in this kind of watershed in southern Missouri, and John all over the country, that they get it as soon as they see something. I didn't have to explain too much to them, just point out an observation of this is a trouble spot, and all. They got it immediately. So they're going to be really, really good to work with. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
Dr.
Thank
Remy?
you, Dr. Hammer. So first of all, when you're in my neighborhood that much, feel free to always knock on my door. We'll give you some cookies and a drink.
Which door is that?
So in what you described with these prioritized locations, do you know, thus far has Mr. Jones and the consulting group been able to ascribe at least some budgetary estimation so far, or is it too early in the process that you're aware of?
It's way too early. They need to do some modeling before they do that. And in addition, they need some kind of topographic data that's got more vertical resolution, precision, and accuracy than the standard USGS data. That's why they want the LiDAR.
Okay.
They're not going to be able to do much anyway, Ken, because they're wrapping up several projects by the end of the year. They're trying to clear everything off their desk so that when they get busy with us, they can go full speed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Mr. Archesty, just a couple of concluding comments relative to the memorandum that was prepared for the task force. As Dr. Remy just mentioned, the intent primarily of Mr. Jones and Mr. Wilson is to kind of take what Dr. Hammer has prepared and what the task force ultimately agrees in terms of the priority locations and begin that cost estimating. The cost estimates will be developed to help our case with the stormwater and park sales tax. So that's going to start here, hopefully right after the first of the year. And then finally, John Jones made a point to identify, and Dan Rand, our assistant city engineer, kind of emphasized as well, that for the most part, the list is still what I would consider somewhat fluid, no pun intended, that as we develop cost estimates, there may be things that just aren't doable or achievable right now because they're too expensive. There may be permitting requirements that slow things down, and the list can go on and on. So we think we have the priority list of critical locations well thought through. But as Mr. Jones has mentioned, there's always something down the road that may change that. So flexibility in terms of the task force and our city council will be critical for us to be successful. And with that, I'll conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Dr. Hammer.
Oh, sorry.
One comment Joe made that I think I should follow up on too. Dan was in the field with us all day from 7:30 till the time we got back, and I was really glad to see him out there. He had a lot to contribute, and it's nice to see the team growing. So thanks, Dan, for joining us and all the contributions you made.
John Gunther, then Dr. Remy.
Your report, and then again tonight, I really feel a sense of urgency. I think we all do. At the same time, we know we need to have time to plan. We need to have time to raise funds, hopefully through this tax proposal. But that's all, we're talking out a year plus. And I guess that really begs the question, do we need to get in for those interim approaches to move the chart around to help at least buy some time to stabilize these serious conditions that could change, any time? Your thoughts on that, Dr. Hammer?
I was waiting to see if Mr. Vunich had anything to say. We think that that's a priority, that buying the time is absolutely essential, and we need to get that, the modeling they need to do for that done as soon as we can. That's their first priority, from what I understood from the conversations in the field. When they get their desk cleared and we get that LiDAR information, that's the first thing they're going to be looking at. So you're spot on with that, John.
And could I have a real quick follow-up to that? By doing, I'll call it a temporary fix to buy time to move some chart around, does that then complicate things later on when you want to repair these stream banks properly?
I don't think so, because one of the things that would come out of that's another good question, because one of the things that we were asking ourselves in the field was, can we use this chert permanently? So if it turns out that stuff packs pretty well, there'll be a lot less fill associated with this triple meander work than we did on the Strecker Road cut bank, and that'll really cut down the expenses. If a bulk of the materials we need to build the banks back out and recontour them the way they need to be recontoured is in the channel already, that's a huge savings. So that was a great question. We hadn't proceeded far enough in those discussions for me to want to put it out there yet, but since you asked the question, there it is.
And maybe this one for Joe, and I'm sorry to monopolize, but do we even have funds to do something temporarily while we're waiting for greater funds to become available to do the permanent repairs, as permanent as they can be?
The 2021 budget, through the efforts of the city council members that are part of the task force, has $125,000 set aside for what I would consider the first half of the year. There was a commitment to look back and see how we're doing at mid-year when we do budget adjustments. So that's kind of our primer to the engine, I guess is what I would say.
Well, maybe if Dan's trained on a backhoe and the city can buy a backhoe. Dr. Remy.
I'm happy to learn.
Actually, I think Dr. Rambo's probably got good skill sets in that area too, but I'm afraid where he might put the rocks near my house.
I've been begging for the chance to do it.
I know you have. So, Mr. Vunich, do you need a motion at all from this task force tonight on these prioritized locations?
It's a very good question, and thank you for asking it, Dr. Remy. As you know, the City Council is expecting something at its next meeting relative to the prioritization and the factors or rationales that were used. I'd feel a lot better going there if there was a motion endorsing the list we have before us tonight, at least as a start. That way I could say it with some authority to City Council. Thank you.
We're looking for a motion then.
I'll make it.
Motion by Councilman Farmer, second by Councilman McCutcheon. Any discussion?
I think we need to make some language that sort of says current priorities and recognizes that this is going to continue to be a dynamic list for very good reasons.
I would be glad to kind of work that into the report that eventually comes from the task force to City Council, Ms. Holthouse.
Anyone else? We have a voice vote? Or do you want to do this as a, can we do a voice vote? It's fine? Okay.
Fine by me, sir.
Everyone in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstained? Motion carries. So we have our list, which is a ever flowing list, but I think we have a good start.
Thank you.
Sales tax initiative. I know, Joe, you probably have, or Kathy, one of you, and I see you have some information on the August and the November one. It doesn't really matter. We just need a simple majority on both. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. The state statute just says whenever the vote's taken, it just needs a simple majority.
Any discussion on this? We want to pick a date tonight? Councilman McCutcheon?
Yeah, I really think we should go with November to give us more of a lead time in order to prepare and get the information to the residents. When we tried to do a sewer lateral tax, we had a real issue. We did not go out far enough ahead, and the residents then did not really understand what it was that we were that we put on the ballot and all the background information for that. So I think the more time that we can give ourselves to really reach out to the public, really educate them on what we're trying to do, get them to buy into it, is really the best approach, especially given COVID. I know a lot of residents are out of employment currently and may be coming so down the road. So to ask them to tack on another tax, I think is going to be difficult. And I think while we understand the necessity and the urgency of this project, we really need to make sure that we get that out before the public and really get them to understand and buy into this, especially since it's tax related.
Councilman Rambo?
Yeah, just real quickly. This is only one of two high cost nuts that we have to crack in the very near future. And I just want to make sure that the WETF doesn't walk on the RIAC. Because I think they're going to have, we're looking for funding sources for internet improvement, which was, believe it or not, an even higher priority for council folks, I think appropriately so. And that may require a sales tax request for the voters as well. And since we can only do half cent at a time, I don't know, maybe one of the city employees can answer this question, but I don't know if we can ask for 2 half-cent increases in the same election for 2 different purposes, or just exactly how we're going to do that. And I know this is not an internet meeting, but I A, wanted to make everyone aware of that, and B, ask if anyone has any information about how we can handle these 2 funding requests at virtually the same time.
Well, Dr. Rambo, the only thing I would mention in response to your question, because I don't know the protocol for 2 sales tax proposals at the same election or within the same year, et cetera. We can certainly do some research and find information for the task force and yourself. What I will tell you, though, is the city already has an established sales tax for capital improvements, and typically stormwater repairs, restorations can come from capital improvements. So there is a source there. We use that source for many other items: roads, bridges, trails, parks, rural internet, capital purchases such as vehicles, etc. So I think what ultimately will need to be done, if there's not a straightforward approach to a third sales tax, let's say, one for internet, then we have to prioritize, and that will ultimately fall on the city council.
Sure. Okay. It's worth mentioning in the upfront. That was all I was trying to do. So thank you.
You're
Mr.
welcome.
Gunther?
Just a question, on the notes, we talked about 1/4 cent and 1/2 cent. So I'm assuming it's the 1/2 cent, but we can confirm that. And then the other is, it's, I think it's called for parks and streams. And I'm wondering, do we need to say how the funds, if it passes, is there a percentage established between those two causes, or do you leave it flexible and address the needs? And there may be a year where most of the funds need to go into repairing the stream banks.
Yeah, my understanding is it's flexible. We can use the funds for either or. There's no breakout of a percentage per se. And I would tend to agree with Councilman McCutcheon on the November one. We don't even know if there's going to be something on the August one for sure anyway. That could be the only item, and how many people are going to come out and vote for that. So I don't know. That's my opinion, but we're all here as a group. Let's discuss this some more. Mr. Patton and then Mrs. Clark.
I did a lot of looking at what Creve Coeur did with Prop C, which, as you know, passed there. And 2 months before the election. So if you did do it in August, you'd be hitting people in June and July. And especially if things start improving virus-wise, I think you won't have a lot of attention on things during those months. Probably not in the summer anyway. So that would kind of argue again more for the November time frame. And the other thing, in answer to John's question, they did tell me at Creve Coeur that one of the questions that came up at their virtual town hall meetings on this was how you're going to allocate funds between parks and stormwater. So that will probably be something that we'll have to figure out some way of addressing.
Councilman Clark.
I just want to tag on to what Councilmember McCutcheon was saying about the need to educate the people, because I don't have a whole lot of confidence that a tax increase is going to be something that the public is going to appreciate this year, and we'll have to really work to educate them on why, because there's a lot of people that this doesn't affect directly. And if it doesn't directly affect you, sometimes you can say, well, I don't want to pay for that. And I'm afraid that the ones that it affects directly are so fewer than the ones that it doesn't. Our backyards in Ward 1, Ward 6, a few of the other wards, specific areas are affected. And without us going in public and saying, here's the disaster that's going to happen, with Dr. Hammer's expertise, he can show us, and maybe if we have pictures of things that have happened because of this, I think we have to be very straightforward and not just put it in just technical language, but to put it in pictures and touch the masses of people, and not just the city council and our committees and the people that really understand it. Because most of the people don't think about this they just don't think about it. And it doesn't seem as real unless we show it in pictures, I think. That's all.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. That's why we're hoping longer we go, maybe Wildwood Days appears and and things of that sort, where we can actually have a booth at Wildwood Days and show pictures of what's happening and the infrastructure that's being, encroached upon and things of that sort. Mr. Gunther.
I would also reinforce what's just been said. And I think with Dr. Hammer's report, the word that keeps coming back to me is urgency. And then the second thing that really catches one's attention is, these images that are shown in the report are very powerful. And then when you start to talk about roads and bridges going out, then it becomes a bigger issue for more people, affects more people than the people that, unfortunately are losing land to these stream banks. But when you start talking about roads getting washed away, I think that grabs attention as well.
Mrs. Donaldson?
Do we have any information on how many homes are actually affected in Wildwood by this situation, the streams and waterways, erosion?
I mean, we've got a list of people that sent in problems in their backyard. I don't know how many. I mean, that's close to 90 on Cox Creek alone, I think, somewhere in there.
Wow.
Kathy might be able to answer that question better than I.
I think if you make Mr. Gunther's argument also that it affects all of these roads, one might argue that it affects everyone.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Thank you.
The task force sent out a brochure to all people that were what we considered in floodplain or next to floodplain. And Kathy, how many brochures did we send out?
817.
So we at least know that there's probably around 1,000 properties or so that have some relationship to the main channel or the floodplain of the main channel of the 9 creeks.
As a point of reference, if we send, there's probably 13,000 parcels in the city. That's about what we mail for the Gazette. So yeah, this is about 1,000 and it's a little bit more on internet. So,
Mr. Gunther?
Just a quick question in terms of mapping and visually showing maybe with red dots or whatever, where these reports are from these various residences, maybe that would help to further drive home where these problems are with a quick glance with an aerial map.
We can certainly do that with the assistance of Mr. Jacquin, our Deputy Interim City Administrator. He's a whiz with the GIS.
Councilman Farmer.
Yeah, hey, this is probably for Joe or Kathy. I know that the last time we did this, it was under like parks and stormwater. Does it have to be the same kind of a thing? Because while I am of the opinion that the watershed obviously is of critical importance. I mean, we did just sit in this meeting the other day where the pretty overwhelming number of council members rated the internet thing as the more top priority just based on what's going on with people needing to connect, Zoom wise. So is there a way that we could somehow not try to pit one against the other, but just make this a much larger kind of city infrastructure bill that isn't taken care of by normal capital improvement stuff? Because this is kind of outside the scope, I think, of normal things, I would say. Is that something that can be done?
Councilmember Farmer, I certainly think it can. Prior to the formation of this task force, we had a group of volunteers formed to update our Parks and Recreation Action Plan, and they identified the park sales tax. At that time, they called it the park sales tax. We call it now the stormwater and park sales tax as a priority, because they also knew that funding parks and trails, both development and maintenance and long-term care, couldn't be done just out of operating revenues. And so I think that there's another group out there that if we're smart about it, we can basically merge the two, double our base, and hopefully find greater success.
Anyone else? Dr. Remy.
Sounds like there's a pretty good consensus for potentially November. Mr. Boninger, Ms. Arnett, then is the plan that we should at least make a motion for that, and then, because obviously it'll have to go to council, I guess. So I think just with time of being the essence, seemingly it would be great to get on the docket probably sooner than later. So would you want us to entertain a motion this evening for that?
I would defer to you as one of the co-chairs and the other co-chair, but I think if we look at it realistically, we're 11 months from the election. So I think the sooner, the better. And I think one of the items that we would owe you in January when we meet again as the task force is maybe just the start of a timeline of what we all need to do, the steps in the process to get us there by the November election date.
Dr. Remy, that would be for a half sale sense, half? Okay. Councilman McCutcheon?
Yeah, just given the most recent comments about adding another item to our potential bill for stormwater and parks, and then I'm guessing Councilmember Farmer wanted to add internet to that as well. So if that's the fact, then we need to determine that, I think, before we vote about putting it on the ballot.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering if we put the two things together, does that help us get a larger pool of people so that people can see what's going on? Because I mean, we had a conversation in our subdivision meeting about it, and everybody was like, yeah, this makes sense. And then one guy was like, well, I live on the high side of the creek, so why do I care if it caves in? And I said, well, because the bridges down Strecker Road are going to go down too. And he was like, oh, well, I drive that way to work every day. That would be bad. So now I'm on board with this idea. And I was like, okay, great, man.
I think that's part of what we need to really focus on, are those kinds of issues when we go out to educate the public. But I think if we're going to add the internet into the sales tax, I think we really need to vote on that before we take it to council.
Ms. McCutcheon, I apologize if I was unclear. I think the response was it's a stormwater and parks sales tax. And the group that previously met was the Parks Action Plan Update Committee. Those are the ones I would like to kind of loop into this conversation at some point, have them provide us input on how they think that the money can be divided and achieve goals for both those interests in parks and recreation, trails, and then obviously stormwater erosion. My apologies, I wasn't clear, I think.
No, I understood what you were saying. I was just talking, piggybacking on what Councilmember Farmer said. No, I totally understand. I think that's an excellent idea, Joe.
Joe, would if the sales tax for the internet, would that be limited the number of years, or would that go on forever? I mean, I know these are usually 5 or 10 years for a normal tax, but would we need the money longer for the internet?
That's a good question. I don't know of a funding source for internet via a sales tax other than the capital improvements, which we already have in place and collect approximately $2.2 to $2.4 million each year. So I'll have to do some research on if there is an option for a sales tax. There's an economic development sales tax that may work for internet. I don't know. That's something again, Ms. Jacqueline can investigate with the Department of Planning and Parks. But for right now, we have a capital improvement sales tax. We're looking at a stormwater and park sales tax. There may be a third one out there, but I need to identify it and then give you clarity at the next meeting.
Mr. Gunther.
If everything is put under one roof, so to speak, does that mean it's one half-cent initiative for internet and stormwater and parks then?
Right.
The state statute, the state law limits park and stormwater sales tax could not be spent on internet. And I think what Joe is saying is we don't know of another possible sales tax outside of the capital improvements that we already have that could be used for internet. So I think the funding mechanism would have to be something completely different. This would be the park and stormwater sales tax, and then there would be a completely different funding. And you're right, there is an end to the cost of the internet based on the proposals that we've received. So I think I think that I'm putting my nose in where it doesn't necessarily belong, but I think the rural internet and the city council needs to figure out how to fund that. And if you all want the parks and stormwater sales tax, they're two completely separate issues. I get that eventually it means the residents and people have to pay for all and both, but they're really two different funding mechanisms, unrelated.
Okay. Thanks, Kathy. Dr. Rummy.
Kathy, you exactly said what I was going to say, which is the scope and focus of this task force can only put forth this back to council. Council can decide at that point if there's some other alternative considerations that they would like to make. But I think for the purview of this council, it seems like we have an appetite for wanting this to be on the November ballot. And so it seems that to me, it doesn't seem like we need to delay that, at least putting it to council, since our next meeting won't be until January. And it might be nice to be able to get, if it comes back to our committee, let's say from council for one reason or another, I don't want to have another 2 months in delay. It might be better to get it on sooner than later.
Anyone else? Was it need a motion?
Whoa.
Councilman Rambo.
Yeah. Just real quickly, I apologize for part in taking this down the internet path, but I really just wanted everyone to be aware that we're probably going to ask the citizens for a big chunk of money somehow to fund internet. Sounds like sales tax is not the right thing, which is good, but internet could still wind up on the November ballot. And I just wanted everyone to be thinking about that, even though that's not our charter in this particular committee. That's it.
Councilman Clark.
So it sounds like we're the staff is going to go off and do some research on how we can fund things, but there are two parallel paths we're taking towards asking for a bunch of money from the residents.
Councilman Clark.
Yeah, I think that Dr. Rambo just said what I was going to say about we just have to not put all our eggs in one basket and depend on that sales tax. We need to be, in the meantime, working on other avenues to so that we don't let this slip and not be able to complete the task that we need to do. We have to look at all the other options.
Well, we get ours out there first, and then the council will kind of be limited to what they could do for the rural internet, I guess. I don't know. Need a motion. Motion by Councilman Rambo. Is this for November ballot, half sales cents? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Archeski, there's one other aspect. The state statute regarding this particular sales tax allows it to have a timeline, meaning it can conclude in a 10-year time frame, or there can be no sunset, meaning that it would be ongoing for as long as we collect the tax.
Okay, another discussion matter then. $10 or no years?
I would argue against the sunset.
I would too, but I wanted to put it out there. So we're agreeing with the 10-year. I need a second.
Or no sunset.
We're agreeing with no sunset. That was the suggestion, and that's what I concur with that as
Right,
suggestion.
Councilmember Farmer, second that. So November ballot, half sale cent and no sunset. Everyone in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Next item. Memo on priority sites for work program and Mmsd. Somewhat touched a little bit on that, but Joe, do you have something on this, or?
Kathy's gonna describe
Okay.
this.
Kathy?
Thank you. As we've already mentioned, in addition to the work done by the consultants, we've had a resident reporting form available on our website to gather erosion issues as seen in everyone's yards and that's impacting their property. So we have received 90-ish forms returned. And in addition, so what we did is we pulled out the ones that are within MSD's jurisdiction. The MSD representative has been to City Council recently, for those of you who aren't glued to YouTube on Monday evenings or in the council chambers. And this list was mentioned to them. And MSD is anxious and coming back to City Council in January, and they're anxious to start reviewing this list and see if there are any issues that have been reported that they can step in and possibly help us with as well. So the list on the memo this evening is not the full list of resident reports. It is just those that are within the MSD district boundaries. And so staff would like your endorsement to send this list to MSD for their support and potential assistance on some of these repairs. This list of 90 also is where that priority came from, noting that in certain residents' backyards where we've just seen some issues of damage and increased risk to public or to private property. I'd be happy to answer any questions on the list.
Thank you. Dr. Rummy.
This is outstanding. I really appreciate the department doing this because if anybody watched that meeting, I'm looking forward to politely grilling the gentleman from MSD and doing that monthly until we get some of these locations prioritized. Since I think as of right now, just correct me if I'm wrong, are there only 2 currently in Wildwood that have made their list? Is that correct?
I believe so.
Yes.
And just so I understand, do we need to prioritize this list at all for them? Do we need to help them prioritize it, or are they just going to do their own prioritization?
From what I've been told, they want to do their own prioritization. They already have criteria in place. I think some of these they will immediately kind of discard because they're not impacting MSD's infrastructure. But I think letting them do that review and us maybe not guiding them would be appropriate. But
thank you.
It's up to the task force.
Councilman Edens.
I just thought I could clarify with my experience with MSD. I went out into Turnberry at a homeowner's residence with MSD and the homeowner, and they acknowledged that he was on the list. And it was a bit like whose line is it anyway, where the points don't really matter. It's a ranking point system, and you're in with thousands of homes that MSD has, so it's not just based on zip codes. And you move up and down the point list based on exactly what Ms. Arnett said, how you affect their infrastructure, or whether there's a risk to property or life or limb that is extreme. And so he said you really don't know where you're at on the list at any given time because it's fluid. So people may fix their backyard on their own, or MSD may move out. So every day where you are on the list is a different answer than the week before. What I was told was, yes, we acknowledge this is a problem, but by the way, we have no money to fix it. So it's in perpetuity on the list. So they will use their own ranking system. And I would just say that if you have residents that want to know where they're at, just make sure they understand that that answer is not consistent, and they will always need to check back with MSD to see what priority they are. I can tell you too some of their metrics. It depends on who measures. So initially when this resident in Turnberry got on the list, they measured from the distance of the end of the yard, which abutted the creek, to the foundation of the deck, to the foundation of the house. But they could have measured to the foundation of the deck because the piers are attached to the deck and the deck's tied into the house. So if the deck went, you could make an argument that it affected the house. So the guy that then went out the second time measured from the distance of where the yard ended to the deck, and that allowed them to move up on the list where the points don't really matter. So they have an internal criteria.
I will second that. We've heard the same thing when we've had MSD come out. They have acknowledged that it is a problem, and but that they don't have funds to fix it. And unless their infrastructure is in immediate danger, regardless of whether or not our property is in immediate danger, they will not do anything about it. And they took no measurements. The footings of our deck are now completely exposed, and they were not a year or two ago. So our property is in immediate danger of, deteriorating, as it already has. We've lost our entire retaining wall along the back of the property. So yeah, I'm definitely on board with anything we can do to help abut that case and help them with their prioritization.
I forgot one other thing. And Greg, I don't know if it's like this in your yard, but my resident had a main on his property and next to him for MSD. So MSD told my resident that this is a backyard we would have fixed on its own if we had any money. We don't have any money. You're staying on the list because of our infrastructure. If you lost 5 more feet at the drain line, we would be out here and fix it. But you're not going to get that 5 feet back in your yard. We're not going to add it back. And so there was the resident ended up fixing the yard on their own, but there was a joke about going out with a shovel. Never happened, but
the main runs away from the house. So unfortunately, unless we lost another 20 foot on top of the probably 10 we've already lost, they are not going to remediate it.
Mrs. Boykin, and then Councilman McCutcheon.
Okay. So I just had a question. With MSD getting involved or coming to the table to be part of the conversation, is there anything that's being talked about to just make it easier for those of us who do want to address our own issues, or HOAs or trustees that want to address their own issues, to make that process smoother with them? I had Lauren help me get an engineer out who looked at my problem, helped me figure out what should be done. And that was last November. My project is, I hope, 2 days away from completion at this time. It could have been completed in August once workers came back after the coronavirus. I got 5 neighbors together. We all spent like $13,000 to get it fixed. But it could have been done in August, and they pushed us into bad weather. Now it's taking longer, and they were the holdup. And then they've been the holdup during getting the work done. So I have a lot of very specific input for them that I don't want to take time in this meeting, but there's got to be a process for people who do want to fix it themselves to get it done without a bunch of red tape and extra engineering costs. I mean, they ended up costing us an extra $1,500 in engineering on top of the $2,500 we already spent at the last second, just to finalize getting the permit. But they could have, if I didn't have a really good engineer who's a great communicator, I mean, they could have made us do this whole big study that would have cost us like another $9,000 on top of the 13 we're spending. I mean, it's ridiculous. So, I mean, just somewhere in there's got to be something that says how they're going to cooperate with us as a city, as homeowners, like make a way to get this done that's not gonna defray people from getting it done, and then just make them go around the infrastructure, go around the rules, and not do things to any kind of standard.
I think the city has frustration at times with them. Councilman McCutcheon.
Yeah, we had MSD in Ward 5, I don't know, 10 plus times. And again, then walk in the areas, they also said, well, there's a real issue, there's a real danger here, but we don't have the funding. However, getting on the list is very important because Cox Creek right behind Baja got put on the list 11 years ago. And just a few months ago, mitigation was completed. So getting on that list is imperative. So if you have issues in your own backyard or within your subdivisions or whatever, make sure your residents are on that list.
Mr. Gunther.
You know, getting on the list, getting action by MSD, I hear where you're going with that, but my question is, does MSD work according to best practices per what we're learning from Dr. Hammer, or other engineers who are hired independently? Are we doing best practices so we're really stabilizing the stream banks properly? And this goes back to that best practices and ordinance reviews and things like that. But my fear is that MSD comes in. I've heard several instances where MSD comes in, does something, and our stream banks are worse after they get done with it.
Mr. Vunich.
Just to respond to Ms. Blanken, in the memorandum was prepared on the priorities, one of the last items that Mr. Jones asked that we consider was actually getting MSD into our infrastructure, meaning that we approach them, we keep them involved, we learn from them about their processes, but we also teach them about the approaches we like to pursue and make it a collaborative. So that's a priority, and that priority I think will come out of this process. And I think your point's well taken. We need to get a template out there that everybody can agree upon so that when there are individual property owners willing to address a particular area, we need not to make it harder, but easier.
Mrs. Holthouse.
If we discover a retention pond that's not, performing at capacity, is MSD, are they responsible, or is the subdivision responsible?
Subdivision. In most cases, I won't answer for Joe, but I believe in most cases it's a subdivision.
Yeah, our subdivision's got a real big bill every year for water that doesn't come from us.
Anyone else? We're looking for a motion on to send this list to MSD.
I'll make the motion.
Councilman Farmer makes the motion to send this list to MSD. A second by Councilman Edens. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Any abstain? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Next item, memo on Fema. That's Councilman Eden's expertise on this, right?
I don't know about that. I was at the right place at the right time with the right PowerPoint presentation. So.
And Kathy also included the Missouri Heritage Foundation, which we found Mr. Sturman found out a little bit about, and he might want to say something about that. But let's take on the FEMA first.
I would ask Dan. Dan's our expert on that one, and he wrote the memo. So
okay, take it away, Dan.
Thank you all. I don't know if I'm an expert. It's a new program, but I have worked with the flood mitigation assistance program. So, but just wanted to give you a quick overview of this this new BRIC program, building resiliency, infrastructure, and communities. So it's I guess just to start off, it's a pretty long, arduous process to get into this grant program. Just so you know, I want to kind of temper expectations some, but there is so the grant program has $500 million available this year, and it's a 75-25 split for the city. So in the states. Let me back up a little bit. There's a lot of alphabet soup in this memo, but the state is considered the applicant in this case, and the city of Wildwood would be considered a sub-applicant. So if you read anything about this program, if you see the word applicant, that would be the state of Missouri, not the city of Wildwood. That's important to note because it can get confusing, trust me. So the state of Missouri can apply for up to $600,000 for projects each year, and the state prioritizes projects themselves internally for that money. There's also, beyond that $600,000 allotment, there is a nationally competitive program that contains the majority of the $500 million. I think it's somewhere in the $400 million range. So in the process itself, it probably for this project would be, I said in my memo here that it would be a 5-year, potentially a 5-year process. It's probably more like 3.5-ish for this program, or for what we would probably want to do with it, just because this program was set up initially for flood buyouts, and so those take a really long time, really complicated. So anyway, I wanted to go through quickly. There's kind of I put together a 6-step process here for applying, and just so everyone understands how the application process works. And first of all, the first thing we would need to do is file a notice of intent with the state, with Fema, and that is basically a project outline with a budget and potentially some conceptual plans. That gets filed with the state of Missouri. Anytime that we come up with a project, we can file an NOI with the state, and they keep those on file for 3 years. So as funding comes up, they review their file and to see what they've got in their file and what fits into what they want to do for that year, and then they essentially call cities and invite them to apply. So that would be the first thing we would need to do with the notice of intent. And like I said, they rank those internally and invite the cities to come in. And then at which point we would put together our application, apply to the state, and then we would work that back and forth, and then they would send that up to FEMA as a package with all the projects. One tricky part with the application itself is what's called a FEMA benefit cost analysis. We might not have to do that for a planning project, but if we ever applied, if we wanted to look at doing an actual construction project with this, we'd have to do what's called a benefit cost analysis, which is just a tricky process that we have to go through to establish what kind of benefits a project would promote. So that's something to think about if we got into an application phase. And after that, I added the rest of the steps just to kind of talk about the timeline. So you're looking at probably, about a year-ish. At this point, the program, they just closed the application. September was the application deadline to the state. So anyway, I want to talk about the last few steps just to get into the timeline. It's probably about a year to apply, and then it takes 6 to 8 months for them to award projects or to announce the award, and then it takes a couple of months to sign the agreements. And so you can get 2 years in before you even begin. And then you get a 36-month window to complete your project, which if we did some sort of planning effort, probably wouldn't need to take 36 months. But anyway, that's kind of minutia. But anyway, I think the biggest point here with this program is just, I think because there's a lot of very specific requirements in the application, we just have to have a really, we have to have a real clear objective and a real clear scope of what we want to do to make this viable. So if anybody has any questions, I might be better off answering questions. And
Are the top priorities mostly flooding problems?
Yeah, I have to say, because this program's new, I don't know it for sure, and I do want to talk a little bit more with the State Hazard Mitigation Office, but they generally do in these flood programs prioritize buyouts, flood problems. But I think that we can make a case here for, it affects our floodplain, affects our floodway. I think we could probably make a case for a decent project. So I think, flood projects are probably going to be prioritized, but I'm not 100% sure with the program.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Mr. Sturman?
Yeah, I've been in contact with them also, and I sent in an email out in October with some attachments describing the program. And yes, the last one was in September, and I guess it's just once a year. I'm not sure about that. And I agree, they wanted a big thing is to compete, that you need to identify a project and the cost, an estimated cost. And I don't know if you had, Dan, I don't know if you've had, or Mr. Ron, I don't know if you had a chance to see also what I sent in, if they agree with what you found out. But anyway, for whatever
I
it's
have
worth.
not, but I will review that because I'm slowly catching up with just the documents that have been produced and things like that out of the committee. So I will take a look at that.
This is another one, and just real quickly, and I've said it before, people are looking for projects to be identified in scope, design, or at least scope, I guess, if not design, and an estimated cost. And all along, I've been wondering if we, in our first maybe 1, 2, or 3 top priority projects, is there what we, in terms of funding and whatever else, that we could identify those projects? Maybe it's enough engineering done, design and engineering, to put a fairly accurate estimate. And then later on, the priorities could change if we so, wish to, and have these, or at least the first one, to be presented to some of these folks. I still haven't given up on fundraising, and that's what some ask for. And so anyway, that's just something I want to, I don't know, is that feasible? And maybe no one can answer that now in terms of time and money to do that, to go really identify top 1 or 2 or 3 major projects, their design, scope, and an estimated cost.
Yeah, I don't think we're there yet. Any other questions for Mr. Rand? Councilman Edens?
I put there's 2 PDFs I put on the SharePoint site, and one of them, I'm sure you saw it, it had the previous examples of awards. And it's everything from, water treatment to stream restoration. So in addition to flooding, but there should be another PDF on there as well. If you don't have access to it, I will try to figure out how to do that. I'm not sure how.
No other questions on this. Any questions on the Heritage Foundation? Mr. Sturman, you talked to somebody there? Or?
Yes, I did. Yes, it is the Missouri Conservation Heritage Foundation. It also has a side of Healthy Streams grant programs. I was in contact with a Mr. Kevin Roper, and Mr. Roper is the executive director. He's in Memphis. He's had a lot of connections with the University of Memphis. He is kind of also a professional type fundraiser. And he has an office in Jefferson City. And I've had a couple of conversations with him. He's the big guy, he's in charge, but he is going to step aside in 6 months. But anyway, and I've had some more, I got some notes here, and I wrote more up and sent in an email. his big thing is stormwater fees. He really preaches stormwater fees as a great way to raise money. And I could give more details. He says he has done it and raised millions of dollars. I do not know the exact mechanics of this. I'd like to know, and I can find out more about that. And I'm not so sure if you're interested, maybe see if he could join us sometime or come and explain more if you'd like. But anyway, that's what, and his other, excuse me. So his other suggestion, big suggestion, was to make contact with Senator Blunt or his office for to look for some fees or for some help with this, with fundraising. And that's about it for now. I've got more detail that I had in an email, and then also there's more for me to. I don't know if anybody else, but I am not that. I'm not aware of all the mechanics of the stormwater fees, and I don't know if it's good, bad, or indifferent, that process approach.
Dan, do you have any experience with stormwater fees?
I don't, not in terms of rate, trying to establish them or anything like that. No.
Okay. Any questions, comments? I thought it was a really good article. I don't know how many people got to read it, but I thought it was a good article.
Thank you.
Do we need to do anything with this, Joe, tonight? I mean, this was just information.
I think it's just for information purposes tonight, but based upon Mr. Sturman's statement and then what Kathy, Dan, and I can do, we'll try to figure out we'll try to see if there's any hope here. And if there is, we'll get back to you with what information we find.
So in reality, we covered the next topic anyway. Stream Stewardship Trust Fund. I guess we can go on to memo on ordinance review and stormwater master plan subcommittees. Anyone want to talk about that? Or...
Sure.
Okay, Kathy.
Happy to give you the update. So the ordinance review was, as you all know, was one of the first subcommittees when we had broken into 5 different groups. And its priority had kind of been pushed aside as different tasks were put on Dr. Hammer and on the consultants. And so as we've morphed the subcommittees back into 3, the thought was, as we discussed these internally, the ordinance review is still very important and has begun, but right now I believe the priority for the consultants is more on those priority locations and establishing costs and potential fixes. And so we didn't want to pull away from that to focus on the ordinance review. Additionally, as the stormwater master plan has become a priority, but there's really no funding in the budget for hiring a consultant, it's probably going to need to be the work of the task force and staff to process through the creation of that plan. One of the steps we think is logical in part of the stormwater master plan would be to conduct ordinance review. So the thought is, instead of having 3 subcommittees and having the ordinance review and stormwater master plan, which currently a lot of you are assigned on both of those committees. So let's just focus our efforts. The thought was, let's kind of just roll ordinance review into part of the stormwater master plan subcommittee, and the group that's managing that can conduct ordinance review as part of their process as we work through the creation of that plan. So it's open for discussion. If there's any feedback, input, questions, we'd love to hear it, but that was kind of our thought process as we worked through how best to manage your all's time and to accomplish all of the different things we're trying to do.
So basically we're looking at 3 ordinances, right? Natural Resource Protection Act, grading ordinance, and the tree ordinance, right?
Correct. The natural resource is part of the subdivision code. So yes, it would be that environmental review, the grading code, and any others that we have that kind of impact development. So we also have had discussions at the Council Planning and Parks Committee for, we have a sustainable plannings guide as well, and the tree preservation plan, which has not been updated, to look at both of those as well. So. Did I miss any, Mr. Bunich?
No, ma'am.
So we do have, we still have an ordinance committee, correct?
Currently we have 3 subcommittees: ordinance review, stormwater master plan, and public education.
Didn't we merge those, ordinance and stormwater, I thought? Is that not true?
We didn't officially, and that's what the memo is kind of saying. Like, what if we just merge them? What we had discussed last time was having ordinance review meet first and then have the stormwater master plan meet. And so our thought was they need to do the same work. Let's just roll them into one committee and start the process.
Any thoughts? Because originally, I think everybody on the ordinance committee got copies from you, and we were reviewing them. And then when we called in Dr. Hammer, we were going to kind of wait and see what his thoughts were. I guess we can go back to our original thing where we go back and review the ordinances, and we might just want to start one at a time. You know, start with the natural resource preservation one first, go through that as a committee, and then pick up the others after that. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think you all had also done some research on some nationwide ordinances that you wanted to look at, or that was one direction you were heading as well. So.
Yeah, we did look at some. Councilman Clark.
Well, I just have a question about the stormwater master plan. Is that something we can do ourselves? Do we have to have, I mean, is there a standard operating procedure for that? I guess my question would be to Rick Brown. Do we have to have, meet some credential requirements or anything to put together a stormwater master plan according to the state? Mr. Vonich, do you know?
I'm going to defer to Mr. Brown, who's on screen.
I think well, let me back up and say a couple things. A stormwater management plan, typically for most cities, would be a very comprehensive document, and it would be very strongly engineering based. So typically you would hire an engineering design firm with expertise in stormwater design to assist in the preparation of that document. And that document would be your guide to addressing stormwater problems in your city. And from my perspective, and I've been an advocate for this to be done, and for the way I look at it more of, it's going to be something that we really need if this sales tax goes through. And if the desire is to spend sales tax dollars for stormwater improvements in the city of Wildwood, throughout the city and all watersheds, all 9 watersheds, we need a very comprehensive document to guide that effort. And that's a very extensive effort, and it's probably a multi-year effort to complete. That's beyond the scope of a task force of this size to complete, quite frankly. It's a significant undertaking. Certainly what's being done and the materials that are being presented and prepared through this committee are very valuable inputs and would be used. But that's where I'm coming from. And it would be tailored specifically to the needs of the community and the desires of the community. It's unique for each individual municipality. So it is what you make it and what you want it to be. There's no strict requirements that need to be met necessarily, except you do have to recognize the, half of Wildwood that isn't in MSD's jurisdiction would have to be involve MSD in that process, because they're going to be a partner in the development and then the follow through on that plan. So that would be my 2 cents for it.
Because there's a lot of science and engineering that go into designing, detention ponds and things of that sort, up to what our standards want to be.
Well, that's correct. There's a lot of analysis that goes into the modeling. Dr. Hammer referenced modeling Cox Creek. And that's one of the efforts that would go into that master plan. It will be an extensive modeling effort for all watersheds to identify the problems that are existing from an engineering standpoint, and then propose solutions, and then come out with a prioritization process to address those problems. They would likely come up with cost estimates as well for each of those areas that are identified as part of that process. So it's very much that's already started with this task force, but just taking it to a much greater, more comprehensive level citywide. If that's where the task force ends up with a successful sales tax initiative.
I also noticed, reviewing some of the, I'll get to you, Mr. Gunther, in a minute, that some cities also divide their stormwater management master plan up into specific watersheds. And that may be something we also want to consider. Mr. Gunther.
Yeah, I'm picking up on what both of you are saying. It seems to me that this is a natural outgrowth. The Stormwater Master Plan is a natural outgrowth of what Dr. Hammer and his team are doing right now. And rather than hire, some other engineer coming in and they have to relearn everything, I mean, would this not naturally grow out of what Dr. Hammer is doing and, take care of these priorities right now, but then carry on with a proper stormwater management plan?
Dr. Hammer.
We talked about this in the field considerably with Joe Wilson and John Jones. They are both very experienced in developing this kind of a product. Joe Wilson in particular is extremely familiar with detention basin rules and regulations, laws in Missouri and in St. Louis. So I think that John is spot on. I think a good part of this can come right out of what's already being done with the people you've already got on the payroll.
If I can add to that, I don't necessarily disagree with that. I don't disagree with that at all, frankly. It's really a matter of, is that what you want our current consultant team to do? And there's obviously going to be a long range or long-term cost involved with that effort. So it will take some time to get there.
Any other comments, questions? So how do we want to handle, we need a motion then to combine these? Is that correct, Joe?
That was the approach that the Department of Planning thought might be most beneficial, is trying to, instead of having a small group of people that overlap between the two subcommittees, having to meet twice instead of once, bringing them together. And there seemed to be enough commonality between the two subjects so that their work would be beneficial in both areas.
Any discussion on this, or I need a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Councilman Farmer makes the motion. A second? I need a second. Second by Mr. Gunther. Any discussion on this? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Any abstain? No. Motion passes.
Thank you.
So unless we have something else, do we have anything else anybody want to discuss? Councilman McCutcheon.
So combining these two committees, is there a chair in place? Are there meetings already scheduled? How are we moving forward on that?
Good question.
I think it's the intent of the department to send out some information to the combined group now, check schedules, and then the first action may be to appoint a chair to the new subcommittee so that staff and that chair can then coordinate for the rest of the group as we go forward.
Thank you.
Dr. Rambo.
Yeah, I didn't bring this up at the time because it felt like it might be controversial, but in fact, I'm supposed to be the chair of the ordinance review subcommittee, and I just couldn't find any traction. And then we decided to pull back from it until Dr. Hammer could do his thing. And I haven't been able to reinsert myself into that process. And so I'm still interested in performing on that committee, if not as chair, but I feel like I dropped the ball, but there was nothing really to be done about it. So I guess I'm making the point that I was originally chair of that ordinance review subcommittee. And so there is one outstanding. I'm not necessarily lobbying for the job. I'm just saying that was sort of the process.
Oh, okay.
I do want to participate though.
Dr.
Anyone
Rambo,
else?
king of the world, you'd have the job.
Okay, I'll take it. I'll try to do a better job this time, but I just, like I said, I could find no traction whatsoever. So now that we've got combined committees and we'll, probably reform the members, it may be time to actually do some good with it.
Anyone, anything else? Dr. Hammer, you have any final words?
No, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to provide some information tonight. I'm really glad to see everything coming together and moving along.
Uh-oh. Dr. Remy, you have somebody over your shoulder.
I got nothing. I was going to give Dr. Rambo a little hard time and tell him he's fired from his post, but he made a convincing, compelling argument. So
bring it on.
Mr. Sturman.
I should know this, I guess, but have we brought John Jones and his firm on board?
I'll let Joe answer that.
Has that been done? Actually, he is hired.
Yes, sir. We actually amended his contract to keep him employed for a longer period of time than initially thought. So that's all been taken care of.
So does he have any immediate marching orders for any particular scope of work?
The first set of marching orders was to come to Wildwood, and prior to visiting Wildwood, review the work that's been completed to date regarding the critical locations. So kind of educate himself. We wanted Mr. Jones and Mr. Wilson's input on the work that Dr. Hammer had done. Then secondly, after that, we wanted him to provide input again on some of the process that's going to follow, particularly the cost estimating. And that's the direction we're kind of pushing him toward now, is since we have our list and we have priorities associated with the list, to start doing some general cost estimating so we can use that for the benefit of the sales tax effort, as well as what you've described. I think everybody that has funds wants a project and wants some cost estimates. So that's what I'm hoping Mr. Jones and Mr. Wilson, along with Dr. Hammer, will complete.
Oh, well, that's great. Is there any approximate time frame on that effort at this time, or too early?
I would think if we're going to be successful with our sales tax proposal, that effort needs to start right after the first of the year, if not before. But that's when we'll start pressing the issue to at least get that triple meander, the failed detention basin, and that area at Wildwood Meadows addressed as quickly as possible.
Dr. Rambo.
Yeah, again, real quickly. The original members of the ordinance review subcommittee were yourself, Mr. Gunther, and a member, a former council member that's no longer around. And I'm wondering the composition of the committee going forward. If there are two committees being combined, I'm not clear on the players. Is that appropriate to discuss now, or are we going to do that at a later time?
We can. Kathy, do you have any idea?
Yeah, there are 7 individuals currently on the public education subcommittee. And then, so combining those 2 committees is well, there's still a couple that are overachievers. Member Boykin is on regulations and plans and public education. But we have Archesky, Boykin, Gunther, Berger, Donaldson, Holthouse, and Sturman. And council members Edens, Farmer, McCutcheon, Garitano, and Rambo would be on that combined committee.
Is that an appropriate size? That seems like a lot of folks, but maybe many hands make light work.
Well, if it would be easier, I will send out now with the reconfiguration. How about I'll send out an email and people can make a selection. I mean, there's 16 total members. So with 7 on public education, obviously there would be 9. So people, I think, with just 2 committees probably don't need to be on both. So if it's okay with all of you, I'll send an email and you all can tell me specifically where you want to be, and then we can go from there.
Sure.
That will work.
Thank you.
I want to thank everybody for attending tonight.
Mr.
Very
Archesky.
productive. Dr. Remy, do you have any final words?
I just wish everyone a happy holiday and please stay safe.
Thank you. So thank you again. I need a motion to close the meeting. Motion adjourned. Councilman
Second.
Farmer, second. By Councilman Clark. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you
Aye.
again. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Thanks, everybody. See ya.